Hey everybody, my name is SPAZ, and I'm a CD junkie. On this episode of CD Junkie, I'm going to be discussing Haircut 100 and Nick Heyward. Nick Heyward was originally the lead singer-songwriter of Haircut 100. I'm going to be starting with their 1982 debut album, and I'm going to carry on with Nick Heyward's solo career. So, I got into Haircut 100 the way that everybody else did. I read about him in the British papers. I would, flip through these magazines, Enemy, Melody Maker, Smash Hits, whatever magazines that I saw in record stores just to see if I could find something new and interesting. Now, I'd been reading about this band called Haircut 100, and this was probably late 1981. So I was getting kind of, next time I find one of the records, I'm going to pick it up. Now, of course, I never really found that first single, but then when the first album, Pelican West, came out in 1982, I happened to pick that up, and it kind of blew my mind. I mean, this is before the songs started really getting played on the radio. Maybe Favorite Shirts, Boy Meets Girl got some play on KROQ, but I hadn't heard it yet. But I can tell you one thing, I was kind of blown away because here's all these guys are basically in their early 20s, and they are playing with the precision and the enthusiasm and with the maturity of artists twice their age. I mean, it was there was funk in there, and Latin and pop and salsa and just all this great stuff, but it was all combined. I mean, I normally wouldn't have gone out and bought an album by a Latin jazz artist, but I would hear the influence in the Haircut 100 records, and so it would intrigue me. It led me to listen to other artists of the same genre, but it's not really Latin jazz. It's just the influence in there, because there's so much pop in here. There was just so much going on this album. Now, this is the Cherry Red version. Of course, 2 CDs with bonus tracks, B-sides and stuff, plus remixes and all that fun stuff. This album, produced by Bob Sargent, came out in 1982, and it still sounds fresh today. When you put it on, you don't go, oh, that's very 80s. These guys were playing stuff that they obviously grew up with, that they loved, and the leader of the band and songwriter and singer was Nick Heyward. So he obviously had to deal with a lot of pressure by being the singer and songwriter, but every band, there's a percussionist and a drummer and a guitar player and a bass player and a sax player, or horn player, I should say. So this was a fully fledged band, and Nick Heyward may have been the leader of the band, but everybody played a big part on this album, and it still sounds fabulous. I mean, if you listen to like Favorite Shirts, Love Plus One, Fantastic Day, or some of my favorites like Surprise Me Again, and especially Lemon Fire Brigade, which was probably my favorite Haircut 100 song. But this is and was and will always be a fantastic album, just filled with energy and great music and great songs. And then after this album came out, they put out a single called Nobody's Fool, which is included here. And that was, probably a signpost to, hey, this is the direction of this next album. They began recording their second album, and then they broke up. So the tapes from that second album have never been released before, but Nick Heyward did start a solo career. And 1983 came North of a Miracle. This is kind of an extension from Pelican West, the first album, but it's a lot smoother. It's ambitious. It's bombastic. It's very well produced by Jeff Emerick, who's worked with the Beatles and Split Enz and Elvis Costello and tons of other artists. But this is the expanded version. It's got the whole album, plus lots of extra material, including live and extended mixes and all that kind of stuff. It's not Haircut 100. It doesn't have the energy of the band, but it does have a lot of great songs. In fact, some of these songs, like As Far As I Can Tell, Blue Hat for a Blue Day, Whistle Down the Wind, On a Sunday, they all seem to be songs that could have been earmarked for the second Haircut 100 album that never happened. But North of a Miracle, a fantastic album. The following year, 1984, guess what? Haircut 100 returned without Nick Heyward. Now, actually, the other 5 members do play on this. Guitarist Graham Jones, horn player Phil Smith, bass player Les Nemish, percussionist Mark Fox, and drummer Blair Cunningham. They were all originally part of the Haircut 100 lineup after Nick Heyward left. But by the time the album came out, Blair Cunningham had left, so the band was actually down to a quartet. Now, a lot of people haven't heard this album. It's called Paint and Paint, and it is fantastic. I love this album. It's not Pelican West. It's not North of a Miracle. In fact, I put this even with North of a Miracle. I think that this is fantastic. It's not as Latin funk driven. It's closer to the poppier stuff, but it still has a timeless sound to it. This is the cherry red version, expanded with lots of bonus material. In fact, this is pretty much everything that I knew existed, including B-sides and extended mixes, plus more material. And it's actually a great album. Came out in 1984. Of course, the album didn't do well because Nick Heyward was the focal point. And that's a real shame because people really need to hear this album. It's a lot better than anybody would ever think, except for me, because I knew that those guys were talented. Now, of course, Mark Fox, the percussionist, takes over the lead vocals on the album, and they all write the songs together. So I'll tell you, this is a really great record. And, you know, with all the bonus material and the fact that it's now available on CD, you can't beat that. And then that was it for Haircut 100. They split up. But Nick Heyward continued his solo career starting in 1986 with Postcards from Home. This album was a lot more low-key than North of a Miracle. It was almost kind of a detour, had more keyboards, more timely sound. It sounds very 1986, but still some amazing songs on that album. In fact, Goodbye Yesterday always made mixtapes whenever I make mixtapes for people. Fantastic record. Now, the interesting thing about this came out in 1986. This was a good, 3 years after Haircut 100 split, 3 or 4 years. This album features, now I'm not saying on the whole album, but on certain tracks, features Blair Cunningham, Les Nemish, and Phil Smith, 3 of the members of Haircut 100. So this is actually 4 members of Haircut 100, probably at different times, but, it's nice to know that maybe they had mended their ways a little bit. But this is the expanded version, by the way, if you didn't notice that already. 2 years later came the slightly disappointing I Love You Avenue. Great songs, but this is very late 80s production. It sounded like his label was saying, oh, Scritti Politti is doing really well. And that latest Aztec Camera album, Love, boy, that has that certain ring to it. Why don't we make your album sound like that? But there are some great songs on there. None of them were hits, sadly. And again, extending the Haircut 100 link, Les and Phil play on the album. So, it could be one song, could be 8 songs. Sometimes it's hard to tell. But at that point, Nick sort of disappeared for 5 years. I don't know why it took so long, but he readjusted and refocused his songwriting and came out with From Monday to Sunday in 1993. Boy, was this a revelation. This proved that he was still a great songwriter, but he was channeling everything through more of a classic 60s, 70s pop sound, guitar rock, Britpop even. He was getting closer to sounding like Blur and Oasis than he was Haircut 100. But this is a fantastic album. It actually got some airplay here in the States. Some of the songs did, like Kite, and He Doesn't Love You Like I Do. But this is the expanded edition, as you can tell. Cherry Red put this out. Absolutely stellar album, full of great melodies, chiming guitars or acoustic guitars, timeless even. This is an album that kind of sounds like he decided, this is the album I want to make. I'm done with the music business. I want to focus on songwriting. And boy, he sure did. Fantastic album. And to further the Haircut 100 link, Les plays bass on the album. 2 years later, the full-fledged Britpop onslaught happened on this album. Boy, is this a masterful piece of work. Just like just great songs, ringing guitars. And this is the expanded Cherry Red version with loads of bonus material. See, he was putting out singles, and like every single had 2-3 non-album tracks on it. I mean, he was very prolific during this period. Yeah, he just continued just cranking out the great songs. 3 years later, out comes The Apple Bed, which came out on the Creation Records label. This was the album where he was accepted by the Britpop crowd because Creation Records was the same label that put out Oasis and lots of those great guitar bands. And this is a great guitar album. He just continued cranking out great songs. Oh, look, bonus. That's on Cherry Red. Very, very recommended. If you're not fond of the 80s stuff, but you love just great guitar pop, definitely this is a great little holy trinity of Nick Heyward releases there. And then he sort of disappeared again. In 2001, he put out an album called Open Sesame Seed, which was his poetry read by Greg Ellis, and Nick did the background music. I've never heard it. I believe it's available for streaming, but you must always remember, in my opinion, streaming is the work of the devil. So it doesn't look like I'm going to be hearing it. Then 5 years later, in 2006, he released an album called The Mermaid and the Lighthouse Keeper. It was a collaboration with India Dupree. Again, another sort of independent album that was very hard to come by, and I've never been able to get a hold of it. But you might be able to stream or download it, which is the work of the devil. But I guess if you want to hear something like that and you can't find it anywhere else, I would allow that. But then he disappeared again for 11 years or whatever, and he comes out 2017 with Woodland Echoes, a fantastic return to form. It's more acoustic than those Britpoppy albums, more laid back, more. I mean, he sounds more comfortable, and it's actually a stellar. This is the version that you were able to get off of his, I think it was like Pledge Music or off of his website. This is a version that has a bonus like 3-track CD and nice booklet hardcover. But even the other version, the regular version you can buy in stores, is definitely worth your time. But Woodland Echoes, a great return to form. One more thing that I wanted to add is there's plenty of different Nick Heyward compilations, which are probably Nick Heyward and Haircut 100, which you'll see right there. There are songs from Pelican West mixed in with his solo career. You should actually go out and find one of them or two of them, because there are a couple non-album A-sides he put out, like a Laura or Warning Sign. Warning Sign is available on one of the reissues as an extended mix, but you're going to want to get the 7-inch mix as well. But that's just nerd me talking. Anyway, that's it for this episode of CD Junkie. I hope that maybe you learned a little bit more that Haircut 100 were not a one-trick pony. They're actually a 2 or 3-trick pony, but they have continued to do various other tricks that have excited Nick Heyward fans and Haircut 100 fans. And I encourage you to go out and buy everything that I talked about and everything that I talk about. I just want you to buy physical product. And until the next time we meet, my name is SPAZ, and I'm a CD Junkie.